Hey guys!
Hi.
My name is Allie. I'm a grateful believer in Jesus, and I struggle with anxiety from my codependency, and I'm currently walking through grief. Hey, so codependency. That's what we're talking about tonight, is codependency, which is a great big thing. We could probably spend the rest of the year talking about codependency and it wouldn't be enough. But I'm excited to talk about codependency because there's so many questions that we have. We've heard so many questions and so many people say, I don't even know what it is. I don't understand it. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And with codependency, my codependency, I have tried to be everything for everybody. A fixer, a saver, hyper-focused on people-pleasing everyone, and with more and more attention that I give to everyone else, the less attention I give to myself. And then I lose myself. Codependency not only cost me myself, I lost myself, but also happiness, sanity, friends, my relationships with my family, most importantly, my relationship with the Lord. All because of codependency. And I can honestly say that after 4 years of taking my blue chip, I'm still working on it. I never got that red chip. I didn't. Because for me, it's a daily choice, a daily reminder that every single day I have to surrender my codependency tendencies to the Lord. For me, in the area of codependency, recovery is a journey, and I'm continuing that process day by day. Sometimes moment by moment or minute by minute, I have to reevaluate. So tonight I'm just going to share my experience, my strength and hope. We're going to talk a lot about what it is and the traits, what it looks like, and then also how we can overcome it. So let's start with the term codependency. Okay, it originated in the 70s in the Al-Anon circle. So the codependent was the counterpart or the enabler of the addict or alcoholic. But since then, since the 70s, which is so funny that we had the 70s jam up here. Okay, that's when the term started. But since then, we've seen that codependency affects so many more people than just the families of addicts and alcoholics. It does affect them, but it can also affect numerous other people. Right? In fact, many people are struggling through life with no idea that it's actually codependency is the problem. That was the case for me. There's many times that we feel frustrated in our relationships, we have a lack of control, and we act out in other things like drugs, alcohol, pornography, food issues, or food restriction. Whatever we can control, gambling, you name it, we try and act out in other things because that's an area of control. And so if we don't identify what codependency looks like in our life, where it comes from, then we resort to these unhealthy means of coping, right? So codependency can be defined as an addiction to people, behaviors, or things. It's a false belief that you can control your own inner feelings by controlling or manipulating people, things, or events around you. To the codependent, control or lack of it is central to every aspect of life. The codependent may be addicted to a particular person. And in that interpersonal codependency, we see that personal identity is severely restricted. It's crowded out by the other person's identity and all of their problems. That's codependency. So there's two different types of codependence that we're going to talk about. Told you, it's a big array, right? So the two different types of codependence would be the disempowered codependent. This would be the under-empowered codependent that most of us know and relate to, okay? They develop this as a wounded child, right? It's childhood trauma that creates the disempowered codependent. We find our self-worth from others. We're people pleasers. We get our value in taking care of others. We're going to take care of everybody. That's a disempowered codependent. And then there's a falsely empowered codependent, which is overly empowered. They're also a wounded child, but it's an adapted wounded child. So they learn these habits as a means of survival. All of these codependent traits they got because they had to survive. And so they're often out of touch with reality. They also have those superhuman saving ability, right? Also, another area of this is where they have this unrealistic expectation that you have to care for me. You have to show up for me in my life. It doesn't matter what it costs you, but you owe me and you have to show up. That's that out of touch with reality and the loss of boundaries. Falsely empowered codependents are enablers. Enabling is defined as reacting to a person in such a way as to shield him or her from experiencing the full impact of the consequences of their behavior. Enabling differs, right, from just helping because it allows that person to continue to be irresponsible. So helping is one thing. Enabling is something different. So what enabling looks like is protecting from consequences. Maybe you attempt to control. You help them get jobs. You plan their activities. You choose their friends for them. Keeping secrets. Lying on their behalf. You don't let other people know what's going on. You got to protect their integrity. Making excuses for them. It's not their fault. It's other people's fault. Giving money that is unearned, bailing them out repeatedly, but also making threats with no follow through, and then blaming others for the dependent's behavior. All of that is enabling. That is not helping. That's harmful. That's hurting, right? So what does codependency look like? What does it look like? It can be when we define our worth by what other people think or feel about us. For a codependent, our good feelings about ourselves stem from the love and approval that we get from everyone else, right? We go out of our way to put others' needs above our own, often resulting in low self-esteem. It's when I gain self-esteem from relieving your pain, I make you feel better so I feel good because I made you feel better. It's when your struggle affects my serenity. My mental attention is focusing on protecting you, solving your problem, relieving your pain, or even just pleasing you and making you happy. It consumes my thoughts. Codependency is when we lose our feelings to share their feelings. So maybe we put down our hobbies or interests or the things that we like to take on what they like. We lose ourselves. We lose our identity. It's really codependency leads to a misplaced identity because I lose my identity so that I can be with you. I was guilty of that. It's a fear of rejection or anger that determines what we do and say. I'm not going to do that because I might make him mad. I'm not going to say that because I don't want to hurt her feelings. She might leave me if I say that. That's codependent behavior. For a codependent, their happiness is dependent on others. They feel like that other person is a reflection of themselves. This is most often we see this in our kids, right? Because if my kid makes a bad choice, it's because I'm a bad mom. That's not true. A child has a choice of their own. Their choice is not a reflection of you. That's just a lie. With codependency, it's when we ignore our own values to be close to the other person. It's giving as a way of feeling safe in the relationship. I'm going to give you 110% because if I give you everything, you're not going to leave. If I give you everything, you won't make that bad choice. For a codependent, we believe that our social, we don't believe this happens, our social circle diminishes as we involve ourselves with that person. That happened for me. All of my friends, once I got married the first time, left. I had no friends. I say they left, but they didn't leave. I did. My friends became his friends because my social circle didn't matter. They mattered. For a codependent, our quality of life is a direct relation to the quality of the life of that person. It could not just be a spouse. It could be a friend. It could be a family member, distant or close, intermediate. For codependents, we lack self-love or ability to set boundaries, we also can't say no. We give our power away. Or we also try to control and manipulate so that we can get our way. All of those is codependency, right? So what are the traits of a codependent? The coda is driven by one or more compulsions, bound and often tormented by the things that were, or the way things were in the dysfunctional family. For the codependent, self-esteem is going to be low, often so is their maturity. A codependent is certain his or her happiness hinges on others. A codependent feels disproportionately responsible for other people. My happiness comes from you, and I'm responsible for your happiness. The codependent is a master of denial and repression. I'm fine. I don't have a problem. They have the problem. It's them. I'm here to cater to their problem. They worry about things they can't change, and then they try to change them. Or they're constantly looking for that something that is missing or lacking in life. It's a lot. Anybody relate? It's me all over. Look, we all struggle with codependency. We all do. Codependency is most often a result of generational trauma, but also childhood trauma. And it's important to get to the root of it, right? We all come from dysfunctional family systems. Perfect families and people just do not exist, right? They just don't. So we can see generational trauma played out in the movie Encanto. Anybody seen that? Yeah, it's a good movie. It's like a really good movie. If you haven't seen it, watch it. But spoiler alert, we're going to talk about it. Okay? So within this movie, we see the results of family dysfunction that is caused by unhealed trauma. So the abuelo, okay, the grandmother is the one who faced the trauma of watching her husband die in front of her. And instead of dealing with it and healing her grief, she avoids vulnerability by keeping up appearances. Right? The rest of the family's got to make the family proud. That's what she teaches her family. And so everybody's expected to do that. And though she loves her family very much, her unprocessed trauma results in her self-protective behaviors that her family experiences as impatience, judgmentalness, and invalidation. So how does this affect her kids? Well, she has Peppa, whose emotions control the weather, and she has no control of her emotions. So guess what? Her emotions affect everyone around her. And then there's Julieta, who heals others by acts of service. She cooks them foods and heals them. She makes them feel better. And then there's Bruno, but we're not going to talk about him. No, we will. He feels responsible for the choices of his family. So much so that he isolates and leaves his family because he doesn't want to affect the choices that they make. And in her grandchildren, we have Isabella and Louisa, who are the beauty and the brawn, right? The beauty and the brawn, the protector. And they feel like they're carrying the weight of others' expectations and that they're never going to be good enough no matter how they try, just like Mirabelle, the only one who doesn't have a special gift, but she is the one that breaks the generational curses. So, at the end of the movie, you see Mirabelle and Abuela revisit the death of her husband. And in that moment, the healing begins, and they begin to put their lives back together. So the moral of the story is you have to heal the trauma if you want to change the patterns. You have to heal the trauma to change the patterns. And we can even see generational accountability in the word. In Exodus 34, 6-7, this is God on the mountain with Moses. He says, and he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness and rebellion, and yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sins of the parents to the third and fourth generation. This is generational accountability. This is sin consequence. We have all been affected by the consequences of not just our sins, but our parents' sins and their parents' sins before them. What's so beautiful about the scriptures, it starts with the character of God, with who God is, that he is compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithful. That's who he is. But it's a reminder to not continue the sin cycle, the cycle of dysfunction. It's a reminder or a warning, right, to the next generation to break that cycle, to learn from the other's mistakes. So for Israel, it's a reminder to remember the sins of their parents. See, what had happened was God pulled them all out of Egypt, right? And he puts them in this land, and then God is on the mountain with Moses, and he's making a covenant, a pact with his people, and it's just taking too long for them. And so while they're down there, they're like, you know what, let's just build some other idols because he's just taking too long. And so then Moses comes down and he breaks the tablets, and you just read the story, okay? But the thing is, and then this comes after that. So they've already built these idols, and then he says, but I'm a gracious God. That's who he is. But it's also a reminder to do things differently. Remembering the sins of our parents is the key to doing things differently. Denying that something bad happened in the past is a dangerous step towards prolonging harmful patterns and cycles within our families and communities. When we choose denial, we don't leave room for celebrating God's redemptive work. When we choose denial, we don't leave room for celebrating God's redemptive work. Remembering the sins of the past is the first step towards celebrating the deliverance that God has woven into our stories. So we need to revisit the trauma. Where do we do that? Step studies. Step studies, guys, they're coming up. It's going to be soon, so get yourself in there. Get in a step study because it's a safe place to dig up all of that trauma and to revisit it and to look at it through a different lens. We have to look at that family dysfunction because what we don't work out, we will eventually act out, usually in unhealthy ways. So the first step towards change is awareness. We got to be aware of the dysfunction and unhealthy patterns in our I want to do what is right, but I can't. See, he acknowledges and accepts his fault. So maybe for you, acceptance looks like coming out of denial and admitting that I'm powerless to control my tendency to put people's needs before my own. Guilty. I'm powerless to control the tendency to put my value or worth in the hands of someone else. Maybe acceptance means accepting that I'm powerless to control my tendency to play God and try and fix or manipulate others or situations so I can make myself feel better. Maybe it's accepting that my life is unmanageable because of my codependent traits, not because of the people around me. Or maybe accepting for you looks like acknowledging that I'm powerless to control other people's behaviors. I'm not responsible for anyone but me. We have to name it, and then we have to give those defects of character to the Lord. Because a little bit later, Paul writes in Romans 7:25, thank God the answer is Jesus Christ our Lord. So you see how it is in my mind. I really want to obey God's law, but because of my sinful nature, I'm a slave to sin. When we become aware of the problem, the unhealthy patterns, the dysfunction in our lives, and we accept our part in it, we quit blaming everybody else, and we become willing to open up to God and accept his help, that's when we can start healing the hurt, and that's when we break the cycle of dysfunction in our families, and we save our future generations, guys. That's how we do it. So you cannot accept help without acknowledging the need for it. We have to do that. Paul was very aware of his need for God. If we refuse to acknowledge our need for God's help, then essentially we're denying the deliverance that God wants to give us. So we need to ask for help. Dysfunction ignored will eventually lead to destruction. So we can't ignore it. We have to come to the realization that we need help. We have to accept it. We see this destruction play out in the movie Encanto. The family is scattered and the house literally crumbles to pieces because everybody wanted to ignore it. But it just takes one. It just takes one. Maybe it starts with you to break that cycle of dysfunction within your family. So we do this. We learn to break the cycle of dysfunction and reverse all of those things that we've been taught and trained in how to respond. And we do that in our step studies like we talked about, but also in working the steps, one step at a time, living the principles, but also in open share group, because in open share group, we have an opportunity to hold ourselves accountable. To say, you know what, this was my struggle this week. This is my victory this week. I'm still struggling, but I'm still here. I'm aware. If you're aware of it, then you can start to change those patterns. For me, my mom was the daughter of an alcoholic. She never healed her trauma or learned how to regulate her emotions, and I felt like she was a little more emotionally absent. So I tried to fix it. I felt good when I could make her happy. Like if she was sad and I came in and I did something to make her happy, then I felt good about myself because I did it. I gave myself this false sense of power. And then in doing that, I felt like I had to take care of everybody else. And the more I took care of everybody else, the less I cared about myself. My self-worth was depleted. Because of that lack of self-worth, I allowed myself to be in abusive relationships, and I allowed things to happen to me that hurt me very much and affected all of my relationships because I couldn't say no, because I was afraid to say no. I had no boundaries. I had no self-love. Proverbs 29:25 says, fearing people is a dangerous trap, but trusting the Lord is safety. I fell into that trap. I was afraid to upset or ruffle, and I fell into that trap because I thought if I loved them enough, they would change. See, codependency is a lie about what love is. It's a lie. It tells us that if we love others enough, we can fix them. It tells us if we give them everything, they'll love us back. It tells us that our value is in the opinions of others. If we say no, we're going to let them down. That's a lie. Shielding them from their consequences is okay. That's a lie that codependency tells us. But 1 Corinthians 13:4-5 says, love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It isn't irritable, and it keeps no record of being wrong. But my codependency made me bitter, made me angry, self-righteous, resentful, jealous. That is the opposite of how the Lord tells us to love. It's the opposite. Essentially, we're idolizing people, right? But Matthew 22:37-38 says, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And if my mind is obsessed on you, then I'm not fully given the Lord my heart, my soul, or my mind. I'm giving it to you. And then it says in second, and equally important, love your neighbor as yourself, not more. He doesn't say love everyone more than you do yourself. God encourages self-love. A love of self forms the basis of loving others. So what do? We get in step studies. We go to open share group. We're aware of the struggle. We're aware of our unhealthy patterns. Journaling. How many of you journal? Look, it took me a long time. Okay, I'm not gonna lie. It took me a long time. It was just not something that I enjoyed doing. But let me tell you, when I journal, I can look back and see the unhealthy patterns. Journaling causes me to sit down and focus on myself. How am I feeling? It's an opportunity for me to go before the Lord and say, okay, God, I'm anxious. Why am I anxious? I think so often we want to go and say, God, help me, I'm anxious. That's my prayer sometimes. But now I go, God, I'm anxious. Why am I anxious? Search me and know me, like the song we sang. What do you see in me that needs to change? Because he knows us better than we know ourselves. When we trust him, when we press into knowing him more, that's when we find the strength to overcome all of these struggles. A relationship with ourselves is the first basis, right? And we develop that healthy relationship with ourselves through having a healthy relationship with the Lord. And then the healing starts. So that was a whole lot of information, and I kind of went over on time, and I still had a lot more, but guess what? Same time next week. Change is a process. That's the last one if you want to fill in. Change is a process. Codependency. It's a big thing. There's a lot to it. That's why same time next week, we're talking about codependency again. But this time we're going to talk about codependency and boundaries, how to set boundaries, what are some realistic ways to start walking in recovery of codependency. So we're also going to do a Q&A. Never been done before, I don't think, has it? Never been done before. So if you have questions on codependency, whatever they are, or how to set boundaries, please email Colleen, take a picture, take a screenshot. Please, we want your questions, all of them. Ask your questions. We're going to do a Q&A. Thank you guys for letting me share, and I'll see you again next week.